Welcome to my outward melee tutorial. So I will structure all of the concepts that are important to doing well in the game. There's typically two ways that you die in this game. One is just trading hits with enemy, and then the other one is running out of stamina or resources. So usually in the beginning you start trading hits, and then you get really anxious and you start dodging or blocking a lot, and then you basically get grinded down by the enemy and you run out of stamina. So it's really hard in the beginning to find a middle ground. So hopefully I can give some pointers or advice to how to basically do a bit better and basically crush the game. So what is important for crushing the game? Well, the first and most important thing is just knowing how to play defensively. And then after that, then we'll learn how to play offensively. Then managing resources, which is through consumables, AI, and then playstyle choices. I'll divide it into 3 different brackets or 3 different rounds. So the first thing is just going through the advices for the beginner players, and then intermediate, and then at the end experts. So let's start with the defensive measures. There's 2 different ways to really play defensively for beginners. The first one is to block attacks, and the other one is to dodge attacks. And dodging is good against multiple enemies, and blocking is typically a bit harder against multiples, but it's way more stamina efficient against basically single enemies. But you gotta make sure that you don't just block 5 hits in a row. Another thing we see here is that you kind of need to keep the enemies at just in front of you, and you need to make sure that they don't surround you and hit you from behind. So that's also a bit tricky. When it comes to dodging, you gotta make sure that you really drop your backpack, because if you have a backpack that does have dodge that stops you from dodging, which you should see on the left here. And this actually means that although you can technically dodge, the problem is that you don't get any invincibility frames. So yeah, you gotta make sure to drop your backpack. Then we have safe attacking. So you gotta be able to attack your enemies without getting hit back. And there's 3 easy or kind of easier ways to do this. It will take time to really perfect the different methods and incorporate all of them into your own playstyle. Usually use multiple of them, but different weapon types use different types of safe attacking, at least the majority of time. So the primary one that's advertised by the community is stability breaking. You do this a lot with 100 maces, 200 maces, polearms, 200 axes, and 200 swords, because they're typically a bit slower and have high impact. But you also do this through skills, such as, for example, push kick, sweep kick, and mana push. That's like the main ones. To help you against tougher enemies, you also have status effects such as confusion, which will lower the impact resistance of the enemy by, I think, 40%. So that becomes really strong. And it also has some synergies with sweep kick, but I won't get too much into that. The only problem with stability breaking is that you need to push your enemy to less than 50% stability to be able to attack them safely. So you need to find ways to basically damage the enemies a bit first, and then you can really push your advantage. So here is an example of where I won't be able to push it to lower than 50%, as you see here. I just hit 70% instead. And that means that the first attack happened to be a trade. So I trade some damage with the enemy, but now he's in a state where I can then stagger him to death. So now I just hit him below 50%, he gets staggered during this attack. And then I can just keep hitting him until he's dead. So when he actually reaches 0%, he will try to get on top, he'll basically get up from the ground again, and then his stability bar will reach full again. But yeah, these hyenas have really low health, so I usually kill them before that point. Here's an example where I use push kick, which does a lot of impact, and the point here is to push him first to below 50%, so he gets staggered. And that's what push kick really helps with, as we see here. I push kick him into 30%, he gets staggered, and I can just kill him. Then we have what I call animation catching. I don't really know the perfect word for this, but it's basically you want to use a quick attacking weapon, so one-handed or two-handed weapon, and then using a shield you'll be able to block really quickly. That's like a specialty effect of shields. You're able to block really quickly compared to just two-handing a weapon or one-handing a weapon without a shield. So that's what we see here. So you first just block the initial attack, or the first one, and then after that you'll be able to attack while your enemy is recovering. So you attack, and now the enemy will basically try to attack you back, but because you have a shield you'll be able to block quick enough. So that's another way of basically safely attacking the enemy. I can actually show more of the click. So this is basically how this works. You can also do this with other weapons, but it's not as consistent. And yeah, you might just end up trading hits. Then we have reach. So you just really want to have a longer weapon than the enemy. And the longer your weapon is compared to the enemy, the safer it is. Attack speed is also important because the enemy might be able to close the gap during your animation. So you want attack speed, and you want reach. And the point is that you will be able to attack the enemy, and the enemy, even if they try to attack you at the same time to trade, you'll be far enough away where they won't even hit you, which you see here. You just attacked him, he took some damage, he tried to attack you, but he totally missed. Okay. Then we're on to the next problem. So we just dealt with being able to attack without trading. So now you hopefully won't struggle as much with that. And then we need to take into account running out of resources. Because it's important that you don't run out of stamina, because you won't be able to dodge, you won't be able to block, and yeah, you won't be able to run either, so you might just die. And I recommend from the bottom of my heart, really get both buffs. Don't only have water and don't only have food. You need both. So food is pretty easy. I'm pretty sure you guys know how to get water. But food you can get from basically berries or different stamina restoring foods like eggs, and cooking them and eating them. So even if you have 0.3 and 0.4, so even if you have stamina recovery 1, that is in total 0.7 stamina per second. And if you compare that to what you typically use stamina for, which is running, you also have attacking of course, but let's just approximate your stamina usage by comparing it to running. And running is 2 stamina per second, so if you have 0.7 stamina per second, it helps a lot. So if you think in regards to stamina cost reduction, going from 2 to 1.3 stamina per second cost is actually a huge change. It's almost 50%, right? It's not completely 50%, it's probably around 40. So basically you reduce your stamina cost, or apparent stamina cost, by 40% just from having these buffs up. And if you pair that with a tent, which would reduce from 2 stamina per second, and then that will cut down the usage, and then you will apply your recovery, then these will become even more strong. So I recommend pairing these up. It's very important that you have both up. But if you have water and stamina recovery, you should be fine. You should also pace your combat engagements. Don't try to just spam or burst all your attacks right away, unless you're using all of those attacks in an efficient way. Try to pace your combat so that you don't run out of stamina. Yeah, so that's like the most important. I also give some advice that you can use traps, imbues, and you can also have some health recovery, right? Traps work really well with linen cloth knuckles. How you make those is that you have 3 linen in your crafting interface, and you craft them, and then you put those linen cloth knuckles into a tripwire trap that will inflict confusion, which will help you with the safe attacking problem and that people tend to have. Occasionally you'll meet some enemies that are super resistant to physical attacks. So these could be heavily armored opponents, or it could also be ghosts. And for these engagements, I recommend using imbues. So you can craft rags from different local gatherables, but you can also get varnishes, which are really powerful, even in the end game. They do incredibly high damage. Yeah, and then I'll also mention health recovery. Health recovery in this game is really low, so you won't be able to heal a lot during combat engagements, but there's a lot of walking, and it's not as intense as other games, typically above a minute between each kill, basically. So even if the health recovery isn't that much, in total, as you're walking around and doing stuff, you will save so many bandages by just having some basic food. Just cooking some meat and eating that should basically solve any healing problems. Okay, and then I'm just gonna mention AI briefly. So we have circling. This is often mentioned as a tip. It's decently consistent, but you tend to sometimes get hit. Like I should be getting hit around now. There we go. So it's not super consistent. So yeah, just be aware of that. You can also lure enemies together so that they attack each other. That's also pretty good in the beginning. But yeah, you can end up basically just getting more enemies fighting you. So you gotta be careful. So in this case, with the bandit, I made sure to walk perpendicular so that the bandit is almost closer than me, and that basically makes sure that I don't get hit, and he's the one that's getting aggroed on. Okay, so now you basically have all your tools, but I want to make sure that you have more of an understanding of what the different weapons does. What kind of weapons would you like for your personality, or how you like to approach combat? So if you want to be really risky and you just want to pump DPS, then I recommend doing Gauntlets. The problem is that you don't really have any ways of safely attacking. Typically, you try to bait an attack and then you jump in and you basically hit them. And if you have some skills, you can also push them into a staggered state and then just knock them out. But they are very risky compared to the other ones. So those are usually reserved for people who are very experienced with the game. But yeah, if you're feeling it, go for it. It's just very tricky in the beginning. So they scale really well for late game. And then we have one-handed swords. They're probably, I would say they're the safest weapon. So if you want to play safe, then I actually recommend using the one-handed sword. So you use the animation catching technique I mentioned earlier. Then we have the one-handed axe. They're pretty much similar to a sword, but they are more combo reliant and they do more damage. But you gotta use your combos. If you just do regular attacks, the one-handed sword will actually do more DPS on average. So yeah, just make sure to utilize your weapon appropriately. Then we have the one-handed axe, and they are great for stability breaking, and they fit really, really well into spellblade builds. So if you want to do a spellblade, this is like the weapon type to go for. Okay, then we got the one-handed spear, not one-handed spear. we have the spear, which is a two-handed weapon. And if you want to do sharp, very precise gameplay where you're punishing the enemies whenever you do an attack but they miss, and you do very precise spacing, then this is the weapon for you. So it's more of the method, it's more slow and measured, and sharp. That's how I would describe it. So if you like that, and I guess tactical to a certain extent too, then I would recommend the spear. Okay, then we're moving to Polearm. This is maybe the one that I suggest more for new people. It's either this or the 100 sword. So Polearms are great against groups because of its weapon skill, and it's a really wide arc, meaning if there's multiple enemies, you'll usually just cleave all of them. It has decent impact, so you can kind of knock all of them down on the floor at the same time. So this is actually a great weapon time for new people. But yeah, you're gonna end up trading hits often, so remember to have health regen between fights. Okay, then we have 200 swords. They're jack of all trades, kind of master of none. And there are some really strong skills towards the end of the game, but for most people in the start, this is a pretty difficult weapon to use. And yeah, you usually use stability breaking on these as well. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend this. It's probably one of the harder weapon types too. Then we have 200 axes. They're more like burst combo. So you basically want to push the enemy on the ground and then execute them. That's basically the idea of the 200 axes. Then we have the 200 mace, which is more of a... you also push the enemy on the ground, but you kind of grind them down over time. So you probably have the easiest way of really dominating people in terms of their stability. But it's also a little bit more risky in terms of getting hit, because this is the slowest weapon type. And they don't do too much damage. Alright, and then we have a skill called Throw Lantern. This is mostly a thing that people use in the beginning, but it's not too good late game. But yeah, you see here is a Bandit Defender. It's pretty strong, so just one use of this skill kills the enemy, but you lose your lantern in the process. But there's a way of crafting lanterns, which you saw earlier. So yeah, I won't let you all watch this long thing, but yeah, basically one lantern throw kills the enemy. Okay, then we're over to the intermediate stage for defensive measures. So then we have basically jogging or running. So this is really good for baiting attacks, or even just making sure you don't get hit. So these are like different examples at different stages of the game. We have basically beginning of the game on the bottom right, then we have it in the top right, we have mid game opponents, and then in the bottom left we have end game or late game opponents. You can do some fun stuff there. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Moving on to the next one, which is safe attacking. So now I would say intermediate stage is more when you're getting used, or you have already gotten used to the enemy's kind of movesets. So that's why I mentioned running or jogging. You have to kind of know what attacks will be coming. And for that, you have parry skills as part of safe attacking. So basically, you block an attack, and then you will counterattack. Or you also have ignore attack skills. So these basically ignores the enemy's attack, and then you can do your own attack during them. So for the parry skills, here's an example of that. You're running an axe build here. Towards late game, you also have a counter skill for the axe, but yeah, this is basically mid game. So we're fighting a manticore, blocking his attack and fighting back, and then yeah, that's pretty much how you use them. But yeah, you need to know what attack is coming. Then we have the other one, where you ignore attacks. So this is just an example. Here you have both Mana Ward and Unerring Reed. And in this case I stacked both of them just as a demonstration. Typically you would space them out so that you basically get 2 uses instead of 1 use. What is nice is that Unerring Reed absorbs impact too. And Mana Ward extends. It will extend your... like you can take multiple attacks, but it's over a shorter period. So yeah, stacking them kind of works, but it's also kind of it's kind of you're losing out on optimal place. Okay, then we got some intermediate ideas for dealing with AI. So what we have first is separating enemies, because we want to make sure that we're not fighting a lot of enemies at once. So we basically do something called squad separation. So you can do this in different ways. So in this case, I'll use a bow and I'll just shoot one of the enemies. It's very helpful to have a bow with some kind of damage over time, because the damage over time will make sure that the enemy will keep their aggression up towards you, even if you're out of view. So this is an effective way of pulling enemies, especially for kind of new people or people who are used to the different mechanics in the game. Okay. And then we have another one, which is you can use lanterns as well. So yeah, you can use lanterns to pull aggression. So in this case here, by sprinting and using your lantern, that will increase your detectability. So here you see it's off, and then I turn it on, and then I run, and he immediately sees me. And by turning the lantern off again, then you basically pull this guy, and then you tend to not pull the other. So you can kind of pull out pack members of different squads. Yeah. And then I also mentioned that there are different attack patterns that tend to be the case. I'm kind of unsure if I should put this in the beginner tip or intermediate, but I put it here because I didn't want to overwhelm new people. But you tend to have standard attacks, and you also have running attacks. So as we see here, that's kind of like what I would say is a special attack. They're typically short attacks that try to catch you off guard. Or they might also be something that gives additional range. Yeah. But they're pretty simple, typically. And then you also have skills. So both skills and special attacks have a cooldown from enemies. So this is a one that, like the jumping attack, has a cooldown. And that was a running attack. We'll get more into this later. You also have a dodge and standard attack. So here we have a group of enemies, and they're using different weapons. So you have a mace, you have a one-handed sword, and a polearm. So that was a normal attack. So these standard attacks are basically, they're typically combo attacks. So after they do the combo, then there will be a time where you might be able to attack. You need to remember that standard attacks typically have a short amount of time between when the enemy is allowed to attack. So they're a bit more risky to punish. But then you have all the other ones. You have skills, special attack, and the running attack. Those are all attacks that are easy to punish, because the enemy will have a long time between attacking and being allowed to attack again. So that we'll see. This is part of a standard attack, but it's a standard attack into a special, and that makes it so that you can actually attack him right now. But yeah, this is also a special attack, and yeah, that's an attack that you can basically punish. And what he just did too is a thrust. This is the long distance special attack that's used for swords, and this is also punishable. Right. Won't show too much of this. So let's go to the next one. And here we basically are going to show the same with horror. So now we're moving on to a monster. Monsters typically don't have dodge. There's a few exceptions, such as basically Wendigos, or hyenas, or weavers. Yeah. So there's a couple of exceptions, but yeah. So this is an example of enemies that don't have a dodge. But here you have basically your combo attack. Certain monsters have evolving standard attacks, which means that they start with often doing a 1 or 2 attacks, but then as they get lower health, they will be able to attack multiple times in a row, often up to 4 or 5. So in this case we have 2 attacks coming out, or 2 standard attacks, and then as we go further down in health, you can see here 1, 2, 3, 4. There we got 4 of those standard attacks. We also have running attacks, as I probably see here soon. There we go, that's a running attack coming out. Typically, enemies don't do running attack from close up, but that's at least humans. What some enemies do. So, notable exceptions are basically shell horrors and sword golems. They can really do a running attack when they're really close up to you. Yeah, you also have skills, and those are usually used by spellcasters. But yeah, also a Wendigos, as you see here in the start. So Wendigos will do a skill here, and yeah, I won't go too much into this, but yeah, he has a dodge, which I think he does soon. There we go. So that's like an example. Like enemies do have dodge attacks or dodges as well. Okay, now we go a little bit more into depth in regards to every kind of weapon. So let's say that you wanted to use gauntlets, then let's look at the different attacks that are available for gauntlets. So you have your standard, you have your special, and then you have your combo attacks, which is mixes between standard and specials. One thing to note though is that you won't be able to chain all attacks. This is an example of it. This is the only chainable combo that you can have with the gauntlets, and that's first by doing a standard, and then you do a special, and then you do that into another special, and then you do 2 standards, and then you basically repeat. Then special, standard, standard, special, special, standard, standard, special, special. If you try to do standard, standard, special, special, so if you start off with if you do this and then you do another standard and then you do special, then that will not be chainable. You will actually have to stop your entire animation and you will go to the idle pose, and then you'll be able to attack. So you have to do certain combos and certain other combos don't work. In regards to the weapon skills, you have 2 different skills here. You have the Prismatic Flurry, which works really well with varnishes, and then you have the Vital Crash. And Vital Crash is pretty good, especially with high damaging gauntlets, which is typically the case for physical gauntlet builds. But yeah, the most strong part about gauntlets is its interaction of attack speed and varnish damage, because the varnish damage typically has a flat component that's really high, so you get the most out of varnishes using gauntlets. So overall your DPS gets really high with gauntlets compared to other weapons for endgame builds. Then we have basically the one-handed swords, which I mentioned earlier for its safety. You do have some tricks here. It's pretty standard. I'm not gonna go too much into it, but you have one specialty of the sword, and that is, we get to it really soon. You can basically do special and then standard, or no, not special, standard. You do standard, special, standard, special, standard, special, and you get a lot of forward momentum. So the weapons with the most forward momentum are typically axes, but if you use this technique, you can almost get the same amount of forward momentum with the sword. So I'll show that here. But to do this, you need to, if we go back a little bit here, in this case, you hold W and D. So you hit, and then when you go from the left to the right, then you only do A. You hold A during that animation. Okay. Then we move on to the one-handed. Actually, we can do the skills too. Forgot to mention that. You have Puncture, which does well if you wanna inflict pain, and it has an okay amount of damage multiplier. But typically, it would probably be better to just attack the enemy normally if you just want the damage. So it's good for inflicting pain. That's about it. Yeah, and then the technique, it's pretty good for inflicting different debuffs and does a good amount of damage. Okay, moving on to the axes. So axes are good for interchanging special and standard and special attacks. So that's what we will see real soon. These are just a typical standard and whatever combo attacks. And then this is the way that you need to do it if you want to maximize DPS. So you just switch between standard and special. So you do standard, special, standard, special, standard, special, and then keep going. So the only difficult part with one-handed axes is actually hitting all the attacks. Because it tends to be the case that the enemy just falls further away and well, you'll miss the enemy. That's the tricky part with the axes, is landing all the hits. And these skills here are good for amplifying your damage. Right, then move on to the maces. So the maces are, like I mentioned earlier, great for breaking the enemy's stability. But their combo potential is really bad. And basically you're always forced to an idle state unless you're just swinging permanently using the standard attacks. And you have really low forward movement, which means that typically you will knock enemies back and you will have to walk manually up to them. You can't use your weapon skills, or you can't use your combos. I guess you could use weapon skills, but you can't use your combos to move yourself closer to the enemy. You basically have to walk up to them. But yeah. Then we can then show the skills. So this here is called Mace Infusion, and that will absorb an incoming spell that's gonna hit you, or you can also absorb any form of elemental damage. For example, if a ghost is hitting you with a sword, and that sword does ethereal damage, you will also be able to negate any damage, and you will be able to hurt the ghost. Or you will be able to get an imbue that does ethereal damage. And then we have dispersion, and that inflicts the hacks, so that basically debuffs the enemy with the elemental type that you have as an imbue on your weapon. So yeah, this is really good for spell bleeds. Then we move on to spears. So pretty basic. You don't have any combo potential with this either. So it's mostly just thrusting attacks, and then you have some. You have this overhead hit, and this overhead hit here. That is good for basically catching an enemy if they're gonna run away. For example, a pearl bird. So towards the end of a combat engagement, the pearl bird will try to run, and then you can use this attack to hit them. So yeah, and they're also okay to inflict damage to multiple enemies. However, both this and the other one, which would be what we see here, this will probably be better against multiple enemies. However, you usually have a long amount of wait time from your attack until you'll be able to dodge. So it's not super safe, but it's better than nothing, I suppose. But yeah, I would recommend this one more so often. And it also allows you to special attack right afterwards, which I think we'll see here. Actually, we won't see that here. Yeah, here we go. You can do a thrust right afterwards. So yeah, you can use that to manipulate your distance slightly, but you should probably do that manually. It's a bit more precise and easy if you just use running. If you run your character to different spots, instead of trying to nail it perfectly with these backstabs and stuff. It can be a bit more finicky, and it's inconsistent, low control, and yeah. You get stuck in long animations. It's not safe. Okay, let's go to the polearms. So polearms have pretty basic moveset. They don't have any combo potential. You don't have any smooth transitions. I guess you do technically have combos, but you can't like infinitely chain them. So it's mostly used to time things. So if you need to manage your timing, or I guess you can get some extra reach, then yeah, it's okay. Then we have the spin, the moonswipe skill. It does a lot of damage and impact if you have rage and focus or discipline boon active. Then we have this skill called Splitter, and it does a lot of damage and it can execute enemies. So it does a lot of damage whenever the enemy has low health. But yeah, Polearms are typically really good for fighting against multiple enemies. Alright, then we basically have the sword. So just a couple left. The sword are tricky, but you can do some really neat things with it. I'm just showing off the different combos. So the cool part when I show this is that you can actually manually target or manually control wherever you're moving here, which you see here. I try to make it so that he attacks forward, or like he moves forward. So you get a lot of the mobility similar with the one-handed sword. So you can compete a little bit more with like the axes in regards to their forward moving. So which means that you can keep up the attack pressure. They also have infinite comboing. So you can keep attacking them without having to run up and reposition, which takes a lot of time. So the weapon skills are also quite powerful. You have pommel counter. This is a counter, basically. It's counter in the name. So yeah. So it's powerful, but it requires you to know the enemy. And then you have Moment of Truth, which inflicts a huge amount of damage, ignores enemy resistances. But the problem is that it also lowers your own resistance, and typically many people die because they use this skill. But it's really powerful. You just gotta get used to it and get used to the enemy attacks. So yeah. Then we have 200 axes, and these 200 axes are great for just pushing the enemy down on the floor, as I mentioned earlier, and then executing them. And we don't have any combo potential, like infinite combos, because you always end up being stuck in this idle pose at the end. You can't chain it infinitely. But the axes do a decent amount of impact, so usually you'll be able to push them down on the ground through one burst combo, like this. They'll push it down on the ground, and then you can go for the skill called Execute, which is shown here. And that does a lot of damage to enemies that are already fallen down on the ground. It does bonus damage. Like it has a much higher multiplier. I can't remember exactly the number, if it's 3 or 6 times more damage, but yeah, it's huge. Then you also have Warrior's Vein, and this basically is just another counter, but it inflicts bleeding on both yourself and enemy. But yeah, you can apply some status resistance or status effect resistance, and that will make sure that you don't get bleeding on yourself. So yeah, there's ways around things. Then now we are at the end, and that's 200 maces. So they are mostly just grinding down your enemy, and they don't have any infinite combos. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You just try to push the enemy down, and then yeah, keep knocking them over. They're a bit more difficult to use than other weapon types, or yeah, because the skills emphasize more risk. There are more inherent risk in them. You have a skill with a really long animation time, which is Juggernaut, and then at the end game you unlock Crescendo, and that skill makes it so that you have less impact resistance, but you get more damage the more you use it. So yeah, these are also attacks. These are all also weapon types that has the slowest base attack speed. So yeah, it's a risky weapon type, and it's mostly for impact, not so much damage. Yeah. So basically, I'll also mention secondary weapon switch as an option. So this is also known as a Hotpocket. So you have your secondary weapon in your pocket slot, and then whenever you open your menu using your menu key and you press left on on your keyboard. So this would be A for me. Then you would select your weapon, and then if you press space, which is the equip key, then you will equip it, and then you press menu again, and then you will quickly be able to equip your weapon. So it's often used for pistols, but you can use it for bows, you can use it for grenades or tripwires or whatever. So lots of uses. Water, any consumables, any item, really. But I need to warn that there's a delay whenever you're opening here. Whenever you're opening the window, there will be a small delay, and whenever you're closing it, even though the window is closed, you won't be able to have any inputs that are registered. So try to be careful of that. But yeah, it's really good for especially mid and late game. And then now I'm moving on to the expert one. So this is another defensive measure. However, this requires very, very close familiarity with the enemy's hitbox. So you can really evade many attacks that seem unavailable. So I'll show some examples here. It's just a little bit of a montage of running, for example, in between arms and their body during attacks. And yeah, you can really save a lot of stamina by doing this instead of running, and it will also allow you to be in a more favorable position to counterattack after they have done their own attacks. So here you see it towards for some common enemies. So I think this one is pretty cool. You just crouch and then put your head to the side to make sure that it goes through the whatever horns that the horse has, and you have like a safe spot there as well. This one is neat, but yeah, you can just crouch. Crouch is the easiest way. You could imagine that you would do the same with sweep kick, but sweep kick actually doesn't distort your hitbox that much. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. Hopefully you have enough tools in your arsenal now to really kick the game's ass. Yeah, so I hope you all have fun and enjoy the game. It took a lot of time before I got familiar with the game and felt comfortable, probably a couple of hours at least, just to get into it and not just die a lot over and over again. So yeah, but once you really get to know the game, it's so much fun, and it has a lot of thought into it. And if you want to have a more difficult time, you can also just skip down on all the recovery and resources and really scale it back, and then the game becomes pretty difficult again. So yeah, but staying prepared is like the main thing. So try to stay prepared, and the game shouldn't be that much of a problem, especially with these concepts in mind. You'll be able to build the exact build that you want. You can be able to make your own build really strong, and you can feel comfortable with it, and you'll feel like you won't be missing out really on anything. So yeah, I hope you all have a great day and have fun playing.